Oh, sorry. Oops. Sorry. So let's start now. So it's great to be here again. I've been to Warsaw and Krakow before, so I really love this, the cities, and it's great to be here. Even though it's online, I want to be hopefully on stage in Poland in the next year or so. Thanks for coming to my talk. So we are going to be talking about DevSecOps today. But as you may know, many people, when they say DevSecOps, they mean shift left. And we are going to definitely talk about what shift left means and what also shift right means. And I want to talk about why in this talk, especially focus on why shifting right is also valuable and important part of DevSecOps, even though it's not really the focus. Just before the presentation, just a little bit about myself. My name is Serhat and I worked at Atlassian in Ops team for almost 6 years before founding my own company, Resmo. So I was a developer back in the days, and then I became a technical evangelist, which means I gave a lot of talks and I wrote a lot of content and traveled. So, and then 6 months ago, I founded Resmo. We do continuous asset visibility and security for security teams. Just shortly, we collect all your cloud and SaaS assets in one place, allow you to ask questions using SQL. And, we check automatically, like we check for vulnerabilities and make sure that you are doing fine. And you also get to ask questions. And over the years, I gave a lot of talks. So I became an AWS community hero. I organized a lot of events, and I became part of the DevOpsDays global core team, which happens to be the conference you're in right now. And if you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on Twitter or in my LinkedIn accounts. So let's continue with the presentation now. So, today we are focusing on DevSecOps, but I want to talk about DevOps before, because first, this is a DevOps conference and I like talking about DevOps. And second is DevSecOps. It's really the roots came from DevOps, so it's good to know what DevOps is. So that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about DevOps. And as you may know, even within the DevOps website or other resources, there are a lot of different variations of the DevOps word. And even on the wording we cannot agree on. So there is no formal definition of DevOps, and the originators of this idea intentionally didn't define what DevOps is, because as you probably know, everyone's experience is different. Everyone's company's realities is different. So, but the foundations are usually defined, and people talk a lot about them. So we are going to make a definition, or at least share some definitions. But before, I think it's important to know the origins of DevOps to be able to appreciate why that DevOps movement matters a lot. So the origins is in 2008, which happens to be like 14 years ago, which is crazy because we were just gathering together in 2019 in Ghent to celebrate 10th year of DevOpsDays, and this is like almost 15 years of DevOps, which is crazy. But almost 14 years ago, the name the guy named Andrew Klesheffer, he wanted to talk about agile infrastructure. Back in the days, that wasn't a thing, and how can we do infrastructure agile, right? And that idea was interesting for Patrick DeBois, and he showed up for the session. But the thing is, he was the only one there, and Andrew had received so much negative feedback, from this posting that, even he didn't show up his own session. But the thing is, again, like Patrick was so excited to learn of a like-minded person. So he hunted him down in the conference and, talked with him in the hallway. Which also, I mean, today, obviously, we are not going to be able to do that, but which also happens to be one of the greatest benefits of DevOps Days events, the hallway track and the open spaces part. So they, talked in the hallway, and they formed a discussion group for other people to post their ideas for, how to solve this divide between development teams and operations teams. And so, later, after that year, so they, by the way, in the meantime, there were talks about, DevOps cooperation, which was a great talk. Back in the days, it was groundbreaking, the talk 10+ deploys a day, DevOps cooperation at Flickr by John Allspaw and Paul Hammond. And Patrick Dubois in 2009 organized a conference in Ghent, Belgium, called DevOpsDays. Basically, the idea was developers and system administrators getting together to discuss basically how to work better. And then the name DevOps actually came from the conference DevOps Days, and the hashtag shortens to DevOps, and the DevOps movement starts. So why did I, tell you this story? So why does history matter? So the thing is, one of the key, let's say, points in the open spaces is whenever it starts, it's the right time, and it applies here as well. I mean, it was the right time for the tech because the software became critical for any business in the world. It was the single most important thing. What I mean by this, I mean, maybe we are thinking about when we say critical, we are thinking about things like healthcare or things like, that maybe, our lives depend on. But I'm not just, talking about those things. I'm talking about just posting a, photo of your cat. Even that became critical for the people. Like software is basically very, we basically practically in our phones now. So, and that means that, users get furious and companies lose a lot of money. So software became the single most important thing for any business. And I'm not, again, just talking about some, critical life depending businesses. So downtime was no longer acceptable, changing user needs, what I just told you. Everyone, is online now. And with that, delivering software faster than your competition became a competitive advantage. So if you want to be, one step ahead, it's not just marketing or sales, it's also the delivery of your software, how fast you deliver, how fast you send updates, how fast you send updates makes your users happy, which eventually is a huge competitive advantage. So, it was the right time. And many people, don't realize that, but Agile is actually in the foundation of DevOps. So the ideas, if you're familiar with Agile, the ideas, and we talked about Agile infrastructure, right? So the iterative approach, collaboration, customer feedback, even small and rapid releases, the ideas are very similar, but, within DevOps, we focus on those, developer and operations actually working together to imagine these systems. So we move this to technology side. And the problem DevOps aim to solve is, we had this invisible wall between dev teams and ops teams. Developers back in the days, even obviously there are still teams following these, let's say, methods to develop software, but it evolved a lot. But back in the days, developers were writing code. They were just responsible for, writing those, features. They were like feature machines, and they didn't care about putting their software into production, into the, user's hands. They don't get a lot of feedback from production. They have no idea. They have no responsibility. They have no incentives on what is happening on production. So, the development teams and operations teams were so separate. Operations teams were getting the code, building it, sometimes, running the tests, and they were putting it on production, updating the servers, maintaining all the servers, and if there is a problem, it was the responsibility to fix it, even though they had no idea what's going on within the code. So it was really hard for them to, it was a constant battle to keep things online. And within the development side, they had no idea what's going on. And when they got bad feedback, and they have no idea. So with DevOps, we wanted to, tear down this invisible wall between these teams, and allow communication between these teams, and basically develop software faster and better. So I'm going to share at least some definitions I like. So this one is from AWS. I looked at a lot of definitions, and even though it's from a vendor, I really like it because I think the three critical parts of DevOps is, the culture, philosophies, practices, and tools. And sometimes, people just talk about DevOps is just culture, but it's also, it becomes a whole with, when cultural philosophies, practices, and tools come together. And the idea is, the combination of these three increases organizations' ability to deliver applications and services at high velocity, because we want to know why we are doing these things, right? And that's the most important things. Like, we have to explain people why they are doing these things, these changes. And we are doing this because we want to evolve and improve products at a faster pace than our competitors. In traditional software development and infrastructure management processes, we want to do better. And so the other one is from Ken McGrage. He is also one of the DevOpsDays co-organizers from the core team, co-organizer and co-organizer, and he defines DevOps as a culture where people, regardless of title and background, which is important because we're going to talk about security soon, so work together to imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system. So it's the whole life cycle. So I really like this definition. It's neat, it's simple, and it covers a lot, and not just that specific dev and ops team. And what about security, right? So the idea was bringing development and operations teams together. But what about security, and why we should care about security? And we've seen all these short versions like DevFinops, DevSecFinops, DevComp, whatever it is. Like, what about compliance, finance, security? But the thing is, security is probably the single most important thing within this equation, and it's very cross-cutting. So it's like insurance, and many people, they don't think about it before their customers are affected. But when it happens, it's very, it's very cross-cutting, and it touches when security issues happen, security violations, vulnerabilities happens. It touches every single point in your company to figure out what happened and to make your system more secure. So it's tightly integrated with the rest of the company. And we have to think about it from the start until the end. So it has to be involved in every stage. And again, it's critical part of DevOps because security is critical for the business. Enterprises realize that it's not just the ransomware attacks, whatever it is. It's also their users' trust that is in stake. So it's not just even money, but some even go bankrupt. So they prioritize security because they have to, and the fact that especially nowadays, attacks can come from pretty much anywhere, make it clear that security is not just one team's job. Everyone needs to be somehow involved. I'm not saying that it's just everyone's job. We are going to talk about that in the next slide, but everyone has to be somehow involved. And with dynamic environments, with rapid releases that we are doing, 100 deploys a day, maybe in bigger companies, it's not enough to do yearly or monthly security checks. It's not enough. So we need to keep an eye on things continuously, and maybe borrow some ideas from DevOps, because software is now a living thing, and you have to bring in automation and right practices to make it work. So We had probably, if I was on the stage, I would probably ask like, how many of you have heard about this, sentence, security is everyone's job. And probably you all have heard about it, but I will, if your company is not really investing in security, or even if they do, like, I'm probably sure that it's not your job. It's this, you are not incentivized on it. So the thing is, I think it's important that still someone is responsible, or some team is responsible for security, because if it's really everyone's job, it's really no one's job. What this means is, what this sentence means is, actually, it means that everyone needs to be involved. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be a security team. So everyone, has to be involved somehow. So comparing DevOps and DevSecOps, the DevSecOps name obviously came out later after DevOps, and it's popularized as, integrating security into DevOps processes, into DevOps pipelines. When usually someone says DevSecOps, what they really mean is that, doing a better job at security, because it was later, the term later pop up, that the focus was on security, but within DevOps, it's more of like a cover term. So in many cases, when we say DevOps, I think we should also include security. But when we say DevSecOps, usually the focus is on security. So again, like, you probably heard about the term shift left, and it has become a popular way to describe, integrating these security controls into deployments, into testing, into pipelines. But the thing is, it became far from that. Like, many people define DevSecOps as integrating security into pipelines, which I think has, their point, but it's not. It shouldn't be just it. So the thing is, there are actually really great sources, really great research backing this up. Even, this applies for security too. For example, this research from Atlassian, they found out that 57% of teams report fewer bugs and outages after they adopt CI/CD solutions, and that's the same within security. Because it's continuously happening, it actually reduces chances of having vulnerabilities, and catching that, if that thing happens, catching that before production is really, really valuable. That's for sure. And just defining what shift left means, then we can move on to shift right. So integrating security tests into CI/CD pipelines, that's usually what shift left means when someone says shifting left. And moving, security into developers' perspective, doing things in developers' ways, maybe. And there are tools doing things like software composition analysis, like checking open source, vulnerabilities and things like that. Looking at libraries you are using, and static application security testing, dynamic application security testing. There are security scanners for containers, automated tests for security capabilities. And obviously the configuration part is always important, and it's also very, very important in DevOps too, configuration management. So integrating these things into CI/CD pipelines, that's definitely a great way to catch things before they happen, and make sure that you are actually continuously checking out the security vulnerabilities and stuff. So it's important to, if you are doing these things, it also helps us with the minimal disruption to operations. That's critical because in many cases, security is a burden because it disrupts people to doing what they usually do, and they just, they're just blockers for them. So it's minimal disruption because it's happening in the pipelines. It's also suitable for dynamic nature of, new software development trends like containerization and microservices, because, all these teams, they're publishing things onto production from their own pipelines, their own environments. You really have, if you don't, do things, at least some things in CI/CD, there's a chance that you are missing certain things. So you need to be able to catch stuff before they're on production. That's definitely valuable. But I think it's valuable, but it's definitely far from enough. That, DevOps is shifting in both directions. That's why it's in the middle. So it's not just shifting things in the left direction, it's also shifting means in the right direction. So what I mean by shifting right is that these checks need to be implemented at all stages of the DevOps cycle, not just before runtime, but also after runtime, after things are in production. Even we can borrow ideas from ops side when we are doing on call. Like, I'm going to talk about these things. So it's not just, doing things in the pipeline. It's not just shifting right, left. It's also about shifting right. So, when we say ops, we usually think about things like automation, incident response, monitoring, reliability. And these things aren't really associated with, developers, even though with DevOps, many developers also do take part in operations and, monitor their own environments, have visibility into what's happening and things like that. But it's usually traditionally ops and security. Actual teams can learn from ops and do things with ops too. And that will definitely help improve your security posture. So we need, again, like ops learn from SEC, and SEC teams, SEC learn from ops, and increase automation scope and collaboration between these teams. So, so the first thing, so I'm going to talk about 5 things. So the first thing is continuous monitoring. So when I say continuous monitoring, I mean that, after things happen, we need to have the right logs, metrics, and assets. So security monitoring, security data collection, relevant data collection needs to be in place, no matter what, because you cannot practically catch everything on CI/CD. I mean, people will still be able to change things manually. You cannot avoid those things. Like there is no way that you will be able to control everything and limit things on people. So it can be a SaaS tool, it can be AWS, it can be Microsoft Azure, whatever it is. Like it's that thing that just one configuration away. So you have to collect right logs, metrics, and assets continuously. You need to have continuous monitoring. For example, just to give you an example, within AWS, just to do continuous monitoring, you enable AWS config, Amazon GuardDuty, AWS CloudTrail, you maybe integrate with AWS Audit Manager. You do have a lot of things to worry about. And it needs to be in place because, again, you cannot catch everything in the CI/CD. And identity access management, is very critical for security. So it's also, we need to have visibility. For example, again, like within AWS, there is a thing called AWS IAM Access Analyzer. And you need to use things like this. And from an asset perspective, you need to also check the access capabilities of users within other tools we are using, whether it's SaaS, it's on-prem, whatever it is. Like you need to monitor those things too. And ops team needs to be, part of this. That's important, to update and mitigate vulnerabilities at the right time. So they kind of need to see, security and ops teams need to see these assets, need to see, these metrics and logs, hopefully in one view, and take action. So it's required to have continuous monitoring and continuous visibility into what's happening after things are in production. That's for sure. And the thing is, the second thing is, we talk about this when we also talk about shift left too, but also it's also shifting right things. So we need to turn security into code. Ops teams already embrace this idea of, doing things in code with things like especially Terraform. And we can apply the same practices, and we have tools to do that. So security as code is the practice of building security and policy decisions in code. This helps version things, automate things, communicate security better. So this has been the actually expertise of ops for so long. Again, like we need to work with them better to manage security policies that are also strictly related to our operations in every stage. And if your team is small, maybe there is no like security focused person that can happen. In that case, DevOps or ops team, whatever you call it, your team, like, they need to better automate things to avoid manual destruction and automate security policies. That's a great start. So, maybe you have heard about this term, policy as code. That's, a related term that focuses on writing policies using programming languages like Python, YAML, or very popular Rego. And when I say policy, things like ensure that MFA two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication is enabled for example, root user accounts, eliminate use of the root user for administrative and daily tasks, things like that. We will be able to automate these things with code using as code principles. And that, that's important, that's really helpful. And that can be used for rules, checks, policies, and things like whatever you call them, like there are different definitions, different wordings. But the idea is, we have ever expanding attack surface, and this is a must if you want to really protect your business. And just, talking a little bit about why policy as code matters a lot. It's important because it means that, you will be able to speed things up. And for policy enforcements, results in faster operations than manual approach, obviously. And it's continuous, so it also gives teams visibility, so they know what they're checking in one place. They have version control, which means it's also easy to collaborate on things, and they have ways to test these assumptions, which is also very, very critical. And at the end, it's efficiency and speed of security, and policy as code, I think, is a must, and automation through APIs is a must. To be able to actually do things, do security in a DevOps way. And again, like a lot of people think that it's related to development, but also it's very strictly related to the operation side of things, and very important for the ops team too. So let's talk about on-call a little bit, and that's my favorite topic, because obviously I've spent the last before Resmo, I spent the last I think 5 years writing and talking about on-call. I have a book about like 100 pages about on-call, everything on-call in Atlassian. So I like talking about this. I think no one would disagree that centralizing alerts are useful, and the thing is, incidents happen no matter what. I mean, you're gonna spend millions of dollars, hundreds of hours, engineers' time. You're still gonna have incidents, that's for sure. But the thing is, incident happens, but you have to still get ready and do whatever you can to, when that happens, to mitigate faster. That's why we have on-call, we have these best practices. When that happens, we know what to do. And that applies, that's definitely applies to security teams. And traditionally, security teams have had higher, strict, let's say, alerting policies, alerting requirements. So they get notified for pretty much everything. At the end, it's that also means that they suffer from alert fatigue a lot, and believe me, like it's even more than ops team. Like they get a lot of alerts, they may miss things, and that's gonna cost teams a lot. So it's important to handle alerts and on-call better within security teams. And when we talk about on-call, and I advocate for a lot for developers becoming on-call. And the ideas applies for developers, operations, and security teams. These critical teams, and 3 teams are very, very critical, and they all need to be on call. And hopefully all their alerts, they happen to be centralized in one place. That's the benefits are, the reason why we do this is, the first thing is increasing demands. In the beginning of my talk, I mentioned, there are ever increasing demands, and we need to have, maintain this high availability, performance, and security within these more complex systems. And it's only possible that, if we get to reach out to the right person at the right time. And we need to have better alignment between dev and ops teams, also security teams. And it's this notion of giving responsibility on production and in security. And if there is an alert about security, and if it's related to that development team, they also need to be alerted. That's important, because when they are alerted, they know that it's also their responsibility. They feel it much better. They spend time on it. They prioritize it. It means that these teams getting alerts about their own things, their own security vulnerabilities. That means that they start caring about security a lot more. And also it's better alignment of management and development, because security is very cross-cutting. It often means that these security issues, they get delayed because it's usually not directly touching the customers, but it's usually if something happens, we do this, security, because if that thing happens, just in case. But if those alerts goes to the right team, they spend solving these things, then teams and management can prioritize security issues and start automating things, which happens to be like what we want within DevSecOps. So it's a great start actually to page developers on security issues too, for their own scope, like container management, whatever they are doing, like an operations team too, like they need to get notified on security issues too, similar to dev teams. So it's important to, again, limit the scope of things and send the right alerts to the right team, which means you need to spend on some time on managing your alerts better. So on-call best practices. Often, security teams are small, and we need to make sure that they are not on call all the time. And that's one of the worst mistakes that a team can do. And usually those teams also being very small means that if someone leaves, that's critical for the business. We don't want anyone to be on call for more than a week within a month. That's the worst case, because they get alerts, they get up in the night. We don't want that. We don't want to notify just a couple of people for everything. We want to distribute this load, just like I mentioned in the previous slide. And if something is very critical, we need to have we can have service level objectives. We can have critical thresholds, and that needs to be defined clearly. And if those things happen, we can call that person automatically. But if it's not very critical, if it can wait until morning, we really should just send a chat message on Slack, whatever you're using, Discord, or send an email. And we make sure that we only notify people for very critical stuff, so they know that it's important. Ensure that no one becomes on call again for more than a week. And the thing is, escalations also needs to be defined, which means if someone is busy, anything can happen, obviously. So if someone is busy, that person knows that there's a backup and they're taking care of these things. So we need to have automated escalations in place for security, for operations, and for development, which is very critical for a good DevSecOps practice. So the fourth one is centralized asset management, which also happens to be our interest these days in Resmo. So it's important because I want to mention it because we have that's one of the biggest trends. The number one trend in security and risk management today is attack surface expansion, which means we have all these assets created within all these cloud accounts, especially with multi-accounts. Multi-cloud also going to be mainstream nowadays. Also SaaS tools. When we started, we are using 25 different SaaS tools for our operations, and we are a new startup, and we have to really use those tools to be able to move faster and keeping an eye on things and making sure that all the created assets have the right configuration, they don't possess any critical information to outside, everyone has the right capabilities, every tool has the right practices in place, like two-factor authentication enabled, things like that. It's really hard without centralizing these things, simplifying modern asset management. Otherwise, it's all scattered around. And same for microservices or other things too. Modern asset management should cover all these pieces together, tie them together, and make it for security and ops teams especially have visibility into what's happening. And modern asset configurations and their change history should be recorded too, because at the end, when things happen, again, they will happen, you need a track record of what happened and changes made within these assets. And again, ops is good working with APIs. We can apply the same practices here and automate stuff and centralize assets and resources with automation. All right, I can see you smiling. So compliance. If you have ever done compliance reviews or compliance team reach out to you, you know what I mean. And often it's a bigger burden than security. Because security can be, in many cases, security teams or ops teams, they can automate stuff, and limit the burden on development teams. They just do like minimal stuff, and everything is usually working better. Or with compliance, we are so used to do things manually and collecting evidence from teams, asking for them to fill out forms, respond to Jira tickets, whatever you are using, like combining all those things and tying them together and creating those reports. It's a hell. I mean, it's one of the worst things ever. If you are doing all these things manually, especially in bigger companies, it's a big team's job. And the thing is, I mean, it's a good intention because compliance is good for companies to comply with best practices and apply best practices and make sure that we are, our customers are taken care of, we are secure. But the thing is, it's usually filling out forms and not doing a lot of security for teams. And it may lead to poor results. So we need a better approach and automate compliance. And again, like I really like this when I use the same image for different things. So replace that with, compliance reviews with microservices. That's also valid. So, but in this time it's compliance. Within compliance, it's a nightmare for a lot of teams. So continuous compliance is a must, and compliance is critical for security. And you have a framework to check what is important. That's a gold. I mean, actually what you must check. Obviously, you can do much better than just doing compliance checks, but it's also a great start to do some great security. So it's a must also for many enterprises. So if you're doing SaaS, for example, you have to, if you want to sell in the US, you better get SOC 2 compliant, for example, just an example. If you are doing like healthcare, you care about HIPAA compliance. So it's a natural extension and must for in many cases, so you have to do it. But it's been a blocker again for many companies, and that leads to doing things for the sake of doing things which we hate, because that creates confusion, that creates blockers, that creates like the opposite of what we want within DevSecOps. So compliance needs to be part of it, even though we don't like at DevSecOps, whatever it is. It's part of the SEC. What I mean in very big companies with compliance requirements, obviously compliance is a different team, which is definitely fine, but they need to really work together to automate things and make things much better. And what I mean by this, I mean security assessments like AWS well-architected checks, CIS checks, or compliance frameworks like SOC 2, they can actually be automated a lot. And require minimal manual interaction and less distraction. And it's just required to connect all these tools you are using, and it's much easier to do these reviews in a much faster way without disrupting other teams, which has other priorities usually. And again, same principles we mentioned, like security as code, policy as code, even like auto remediation things. We didn't really touch on those things. They're very useful, but use them carefully. Centralized asset management should definitely be used to ease the job of these security and compliance teams. And I wouldn't, I think each of these 5 items are critical in its, in their own ways, and they're a critical way of, they're critical to show you like shifting also right is important in DevSecOps, because most of these things we cannot do this by just shifting left in CI/CD pipelines, by just asking devs to do stuff. We need to care about continuous monitoring, security as code, incident response, centralized asset management, continuous security assessment, and compliance when we talk about DevSecOps 2, which happens to be shifting right. Just summarizing with a couple of sentences, I think it's important that we don't put security in the middle and wait for development teams just to do everything in runtime. And there is no way we will be able to pull things off and cover everything. And DevSecOps is only possible if all teams work together to better communicate and automate security. And again, there can be a security team, there will be a security team, but everyone is responsible. Everyone is, getting their alerts. Everyone is doing to automate things without, much distraction to their daily work, possibly with, with automation practices, and with better communicating with other teams about security. So that was my talk. Thank you for listening to me in this beautiful weather. Really, it was really great to be here with you guys today. So.